Okay. Sorry, I forgot to unclick that button, so we get to go through that. Okay. Thinking errors. So we have a lot of shortcuts that we take when dealing with information in the world that allow us to think really quickly, make decisions really quickly, but that if we were to try to explain human behavior and mental processes, we might make some errors. So I thought I could illustrate that with some examples. One type of thinking error that we have a tendency to display is something called the projective way of knowing. And there are lots of different subcategories of the projective way of knowing. There's the principle of humanity. We assume that everybody's basically the same. So what we're doing is we're projecting our likes and dislikes or our ways of thinking or our interpretations of the world onto other people and assuming that all humans are basically the same. One of the implications of that is that we assume that other people know what we know. I give you a Scientific American article about that. There was a great study of little kids who were shown a very elaborate story about a brother and a sister. They're Barbie doll type dolls, brother and sister who really want the muffins that mom's baking, but mom said, no, don't eat them till after dinner. So they go off to play. Mom has to go downstairs to answer the phone. So the little brother takes advantage of the situation the sister takes advantage of the situation by stealing her brother's shoes and putting them on her feet, walking across the flour-covered floor in the kitchen to steal the muffins, leaving the footprints behind that look like the brother stole the muffins. So they tell this very elaborate story to the little kids, 3- and 4-year-olds, and then they say at the end, who is mom going to think stole the muffins? And even though the little kids recognize that the sister put her feet in the brother's shoes to confuse the mom and that it really was the sister, they come to the conclusion that mom is going to think the sister stole the muffins, even though all the evidence points to the brother. Because the little kids know that the sister took the muffins, they assume mom will know that the sister took the muffins. We assume that if we know something, other people know what we know. This is the source of some arguments at home sometimes, right? Where somebody in the household knows something, and nobody else in the household knows it. Somebody's coming over to visit, or we need to be somewhere, or there's a bill due, or something. Somebody knows something, and the other members of the household don't know it until it presents itself right in front of their faces. Oh, here are our guests that I did not know were coming over, and maybe I would have put on some other clothes, or cleaned the house, and this, other person who had the information goes, oh, I thought you knew. Why would you think I knew? Because you know what? Because you knew, you assumed I knew. You assume that what you know, I know. This can get us into some disagreements with loved ones. How could you not have told me this piece of information that I clearly needed to know? Oh, well, I thought you knew. I knew it, so how could I know it and you not know it? Principle of humanity. Everybody's basically the same. All knowledge is shared. If we do something, we assume it's common. I pulled up a picture of of a furry fan type of person. My son went through a phase, senior year of high school, where he was wearing a tail, and they were holding Fur Fest. I think that's the correct name. He always corrects me. I say it wrong. I can't remember. I think it was called Fur Fest. Here in Seattle. And so he really wanted to go. He wears a tail. He wants to go. He's like, this is a really common thing. A lot of people are furries, Mom. And I said, well, how many people in the country are furries? So he does a little research, and he comes to the conclusion that it's really, really common because he sees all these chat boards. He sees that they have conventions all over the country. So I actually went to the convention with him. He was under 18, so we went together. And, there were I'd say dozens of people there. There were dozens of people there, maybe into the hundreds. It was not a gigantic group of people. I'm kind of hesitating because I'm trying to remember. It might have been more like, I'd say pushing 1,000, something like that. It's hard for me to estimate crowd sizes, so I'm having difficulty, but I think it was somewhere around 1,000, something like that, in the Seattle metro area. And, it was the only convention happening in our area, in our region, and so probably people came from a long way to come and whatever. When you see a lot of people in one room all having a similar viewpoint or behavior that they like to engage in or whatever, you start to think, wow, look at all these people. This must be really common. I'm interested in it. All these people are interested in it. It must be common, right? And the truth is, it's very rare to be a furry. It's very rare to be a master chess player. It's very rare to be an NFL football player, right? There may be 15, there's 30 teams, and each team has, I don't know, let's say 40 people on it. That sounds like a lot of people, but we're in a nation of 325 million people. That is not very many people in that category. So if we do it and we surround ourselves with other people who do it, we think it's a fairly common activity. And so we are basically displaying that principle of humanity again, where we're projecting onto other people our traits and assuming that all people share the same traits that we share. The illusion of simplicity. If we can do it, we assume it must be easy. The link that I usually show in class is of a lady teaching us how to bind off our knitting. I picked that one because I happen to knit, and I know that for me, it completely makes sense what she's saying. Everything makes sense. But for my students in class, this is one way I've discovered who else knits. But a lot of times when students are watching this video, they're like, what is this woman talking about? I have no idea. And it doesn't help that she changes terminology. Sometimes she says pull the first stitch over the second. Sometimes she says pull the second stitch over the first. It doesn't help that she's confusing us with her terminology. And at the end she says, it's simple, anyone can do it. And my students are sitting in class saying, I don't think I can do that. I don't know what you're talking about. If we can do it, we assume it's simple. And in fact, this is another thing that can cause discord between people, because if you're trying to teach somebody something that you know how to do, a lot of times you get frustrated with them because it seems like they are deliberately trying not to do it right. It's like, come on, I've shown you 3 times. How are you not doing this right yet? Well, just because we can do it doesn't mean it's easy. It's become easy for us, but that doesn't mean it is objectively easy for other people. I have to admit, when I teach intro to psych, sometimes I think to myself, haven't I already told you guys this stuff? Because I've taught this class since, oh my gosh. I think the first section I ever taught was in 1989 when I was in grad school. Oh my gosh. It was probably your parents, right? And it's like, I've said some of this stuff so often that it feels like it has to just be common knowledge by now, right? Because it's so simple for me. It's not common knowledge. It's new to anybody who's trying to learn it for the first time. It's not simple. So if we can do it, it must be easy is one of those projective ways of knowing. If we know it, we assume everybody else should be able to know it. Another demonstration I like to do in class has to do with, the anchoring effect. I have my students, I say the last 2 digits of your social security number or maybe your phone number or any 2 digits that are meaningful to people, just not their names. And then have them write down how much they'd be willing to pay for each of these weird items that I'm going to offer for sale, like a cordless trackball. Now, this is not supposed to be how much do you think it's worth. It's supposed to be how much would you be willing to pay. A design book, I guess, that you could put on your coffee table. A bottle of fancy wine. A cordless keyboard and a cordless mouse, a box of Belgian chocolates, fancy Belgian chocolates. So you're supposed to write down how much you would be willing to pay for each of these items. And then what we do is we compile the data for all the people who have written down a 2-digit number that's between 0 and 50 versus all those who wrote down a number that's between 51 and 99, right? I guess it would be between 10 and 50, and then 52 and 99. Generally, you find a correlation between the number that they wrote down and the value they place on these items. Okay, that can't possibly be true, right? Like, why would this random number, so-called random number that I wrote down, impact the value that I'm willing to place on these objects. Well, what happens to us is that we will use that 2-digit number that we wrote down as an anchor for deciding how much the object is worth. So if I wrote down 25, I'm going to value that wine lower than if I wrote down 75. It's not perfect. It's not, a correlation of 1.0, but I tend to get a correlation that's around a 0.3 between what people have written down as their 2-digit number and then the values they place on the different objects. So it kind of implies or supports the interpretation that they're using that 2-digit number as an anchor, as a starting point for making their guess or their judgment. All right, you and a friend spent $10 to see a movie, $10 each to see the movie. You must have gone to the matinee. After about a half hour into the movie, you both realize that it's 2 thumbs down, a really bad movie. This is a movie theater that you can't just go back out and say, this is horrible, I want my money back. You're not the sort of person who's just going to sneak into a neighboring theater and watch something else. Your choices are to stay and watch it or get up and leave. These are your 2 choices. So what are you going to do? Stay and watch it or get up and leave? Again, I ask my students to vote so everybody can say what they think. And most people say, I guess I might as well stick it out. And then when I ask them what their logic is, they say, well, I paid for it. It might get better. I want to see how it turns out, these kinds of things. What they're displaying is what's called the sunk cost fallacy, where once we've put enough into something, we feel like it's worthwhile to continue to put something into it. In this case, time. We've already sunk half an hour of time into it. We paid $10 for it. I don't want to lose my money. I've already wasted so much time anyway. We only have like an hour left in this movie. Might as well sit it out, right? I might as well is the sign that I'm displaying that sunk cost fallacy, where I feel like I've already put so much into it. I've sunk so much cost already into it that I might as well stick with it. This is one of those thinking errors that makes us, commit to behaviors or viewpoints, even when the evidence is starting to point us to a different behavior or a different viewpoint. All right. I think that's a long enough list. In the next video, I'll show you another example of a thinking error. So wait with bated breath.